Welcome to the channel, English Epics. Catherine Clare, known as Casey, received her ticket to the club during her first overnight flight as a flight attendant. The destination, Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. The Boeing 777 was filled to capacity. It was 1 o'clock in the morning Chicago time, and most of the passengers were asleep when a male flight attendant invited Casey to meet him in the rear lavatory. It was the first time she had sex with someone other than her husband. She experienced something so different from the familiar, a new sensation that overwhelmed her body and mind. She couldn't wait to feel it again. I suppose we could say this. Story begins on a hot August day in southern central Illinois. Catherine Clare Morrison grew up on a dairy farm about 3 hours southwest of the big city, that is, Chicago. Her childhood was a typical rural one. Her daily chores included helping her father milk 60 cows before school, and again every evening. This happened 365 days a year, rain or shine. Not even Christmas Day was a day off. The Williamson family owned a farm about 30 kilometers down the highway. They grew 200 hectares of corn and soybeans, and also raised a small herd of Holstein cows, for you city folks. Those are the black and white spotted ones. Their only child, Matthew, was no stranger to the milking machine either. His parents, however, gave him a bit of a break since he was the starting quarterback on the school football team. Go Rebels. They met at the county fair. Both of them had entered the calf barn at around 4 p.m. and ended up next to each other in the dairy pavilion. The moment Matt saw Casey, it felt like he had been struck by lightning. The poor boy could hardly get a word out. He was thrilled to find out that the beautiful young woman was just as tongue-tied. They spent a long time simply staring at each other, as if the world around them didn't exist. A few weeks later, their senior year of high school was about to begin, and like many kids their age, they were allowed to stay overnight in the barn with their animals. They took advantage of the darkness to sneak away for a little privacy, away from the mooing companions. By the time the sun rose, their friendship had crossed a threshold. 2 virginities, given freely. The next night, Matt asked Casey to marry him, slipping a real 24-carat pure gold ring onto her finger, a prize he had won in a fairground game. They spent the rest of their time together making love as often as they could and dreaming about their future life after high school. Matt was from Central, and Casey from their main rival, Lincoln. Matt's cow, Soxy, named after his favorite baseball team, didn't win any ribbons. He didn't care. He had his own trophy. On the other hand, Casey's cow, Misty, was awarded best in show. Her prize for winning the blue ribbon was a senior trip to New York City. Casey returned home with a look on her face like she had caught a glimpse of heaven. She spoke a mile a minute about all the wonders she had seen, from the top of the Empire State Building to the subway running deep beneath the earth, and a Broadway play stage to introduce them to the arts. After giving Matt a souvenir t-shirt, Casey declared, "I'm going to become a flight attendant and see the world. We could move to New York and fly wherever your dreams take us, for free. I can support us while you go to college and earn your degree." Matt wasn't entirely sure how that aligned with his parents' plans for him to take over the family farm. The school year dragged on slowly, but they managed to see each other almost every weekend. When winter gave way to spring, Casey's dream of becoming a flight attendant came alive again. She made a few phone calls and learned that the minimum age requirement was just 18, depending on the airline. That meant she'd be old enough just 3 months after graduation. A week after they gained their freedom, Casey and Matt convinced their parents to let them go to Chicago to see the sights. She still hadn't mentioned her dream of flying. "You two be careful up there and make sure you catch the last train home," her father warned. "I don't want to hear that you missed it and had to spend the night." Casey had done her research in the school library and found out that 2 older airlines, which flew all over the world, might be willing to hire her. Their first stop was United Airlines, where Casey was stunned to learn that applicants had to be at least 19 years old. At their next stop, American Airlines, the minimum age was 20. Matt's 18-year-old girlfriend couldn't make it past the fine print on the applications. None of the other airlines they approached were even accepting applications that I and Matt's mind. He was doing backflips with joy, but instead, his lips formed words of comfort. Disappointed but undeterred, Casey vowed to return the day after her birthday. That was until Matt convinced her to join him at the University of Illinois. They'd been dangling a football scholarship in front of Matt since the start of his senior year, and it guaranteed him at least one free year of college. Exactly 1 year later, they returned to Chicago, ready to flood the airlines with job applications. But there was no need. Her first choice hired her on the spot. Landing the job was much easier than earning her parents' blessing, but she eventually wore them down. "Mom, Dad, you can fly wherever you want on my passes, for free." "Who's going to milk the cows?" her father asked aloud. Casey completed her training and began her career as a domestic flight attendant, working a regular route from Chicago to Milwaukee and back, twice a day, 5 days a week, with weekends off. It hardly captured her imagination. But it didn't stop her. When Casey finally had 2 days off in a row, Matt took the train and headed north. She met him at Union Station. From there, they went straight to City Hall and appeared before a magistrate. 10 minutes later, Matthew John Williams had taken Catherine Clare as his lawful wife. They had a nice dinner and then spent their wedding night in a hotel room, consummating their marriage. Although they weren't of legal drinking age, the concierge sent up a complimentary bottle of champagne. Reality returned on Monday. Matt had to tell his parents that he had gotten married and wouldn't be coming home. It was a hard day. Casey was sharing a small 2-bedroom apartment near the airport with 2 new co-workers. Thanks to their staggered schedules, the apartment never felt too crowded, but it still took Matt some time to adjust to living with a wife and 2 female roommates. Despite their beauty, he never gave in to temptation and treated Kimmy and Joyce like sisters. Matt lost his football scholarship when he transferred to the University of Illinois in Chicago, and he had to finance his education through student loans. Money was tight, but they were in love. They made plans for how they would spend Matt's salary once he graduated and got a good job. The first time Casey flew to St. Louis, she wrote her husband a pass. He got the only available seat on the plane. It was a middle seat in the last row, and the seat didn't recline, but he didn't care. He split his time between studying for his economics exam and watching his beautiful wife work the aisle. She made sure he was well fed and kept him hydrated with snacks and drinks. They had 2 hours between flights and shared a very expensive dinner at Lambert International Airport. Matt got lucky and even scored an aisle seat on the way back. Even better, he got an A on the test. The next 6 months were wonderful. Casey was home every night. At least once a week, Matt would meet her at the gate. This was before September 11th, when anyone could go through metal detectors into the terminals, and they would ride the subway home together. Things became a bit tense when both of their roommates were transferred elsewhere. Worse still, Casey's new base became New York City, her dream posting. Then the airline imposed a hiring freeze, meaning no more new hires who would need housing. Casey and Matt were now stuck paying all the rent themselves. Matt unsuccessfully tried to find a part-time job. Casey had to pick up extra flights just to make ends meet. She was exhausted and began to resent coming home to find her husband buried in his studies. They started arguing over a dozen small things. All of it paled in comparison to the financial battles that flared up every payday. It made Casey a very vulnerable woman. Unlike most of his colleagues, Steve Kaczmarski preferred flying with new hires. He used his seniority to work the aft galley, which gave him plenty of time to get to know the new crew members, specifically the female ones. He was a seasoned predator and noticed Casey the moment she walked into the briefing room. He checked the roster. They would be flying the 6 a.m. shuttle 20 times this month, more than enough time to notch another mark on his bedpost. It was Casey's first time flying on an Airbus 319, and she was nervous. Up until that day, she had only worked on Boeing 737s. Fortunately for her, Kaczmarski was there to show her the ropes. He immediately began courting Casey. She hugged him after they landed in Washington and thanked him for all his help. By the end of the trip, he had her cell phone number. After their second flight together, their texts became far more personal than professional. Every day they weren't flying, they talked on the phone. He learned a few things about her and started showing up with small gifts, like her favorite cookies. Nothing extravagant, just little gestures to show he was paying attention. Kaczmarski didn't hesitate to voice his opinion about the husband who stayed home reading books while his wife worked maximum hours. Over the next 3 weeks, he made a constant effort to be nearby whenever Casey seemed unsure of what to do, whispering in her ear like a snake. One of the senior flight attendants pulled Casey aside and warned her, "Here's a word to the wise. In this airline, there are 2 kinds of stewards. The guys who sleep with anything that moves, and the straight ones who sleep with anything that moves. You're a beautiful woman, and you've attracted a lot of attention. You need to be very careful who you consider a friend." Casey chalked it up to jealousy. Besides, she felt in control. By the end of the month, they were as inseparable as thieves, and Casey began sharing intimate details that should have remained exclusive to her husband. But Kaczmarski ran into some trouble sealing the deal, because Casey refused to meet with him outside of work. Weekends were so precious to her that she wanted to spend them with her husband, even if only to argue with him. Everything changed when the crew called Casey and informed her that she had been assigned to a red-eye flight to Paris, France, coincidentally, over their anniversary. Matt wanted to come along, but the flight was fully booked. It would be the first night the Williamses had spent apart since getting married. It took a lot of effort, bargaining, and outright schedule manipulation for Kaczmarski to get someone with Casey's limited seniority placed on a non-stop to Paris. But he pulled it off. He had big plans, and he was very confident Casey would run right into them during their layover. The day before their flight, a courier arrived with a package for Casey. She thought it was from Matt until she saw the note. Something beautiful for someone beautiful. Ho 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 ho. Steve. Casey blushed when she saw the lingerie. She called Steve immediately. "I'm a married woman. I can't accept this. It's just a belated birthday gift. Besides, that's what all the women in Europe wear." Matt believed this was their first anniversary, and now all the plans were falling apart. Since he couldn't fly with her, he wanted to surprise Casey. He spent the last of his emergency savings on a gold necklace with a 1/4 carat diamond pendant. It really was the thought that counted. While Casey was finishing her makeup, Matt went to hide the gift in her rolling suitcase. But when he opened the bag, he got the shock of his life. Folded neatly on top so it wouldn't wrinkle was the little black dress he had bought from a resale shop to celebrate their anniversary. Apparently, she had also been lingerie shopping, because he didn't recognize the delicate lace negligee. There were 2 packages of nylon stockings. One pair was still sealed, but the other package was empty. She must be wearing them under her uniform, he thought. Matt rummaged through the bag and found an unopened box of protection in one of the pockets. He could barely contain his anger as he opened the box. One by one, he tore open the foil wrappers, unrolled the contraceptives, and laid them out across the black dress. The lubricant acted like glue, the kind that bonds to the end of a marriage. He crushed the box and shoved it, along with the empty wrappers, back into the suitcase. Then he saw the note. He knew it was over. So he stomped on the beautifully wrapped gold necklace and diamond pendant, flattening it beneath his heel, then tossed the ruined gift on top of the soiled dress. Finally, he tore the anniversary card in half and placed the pieces inside the suitcase before zipping it shut. Matt was silent as they rode the train to the airport. Casey chattered away about how excited she was to return so they could spend a romantic evening celebrating. He knew that night would never come. Casey showed up to the briefing with her passport in hand. She immediately recognized the only familiar face in the room and sat down next to Steve. 2 other stewards were assigned to the flight, and Kaczmarski had enlisted their help in keeping score with the new girl. They also had jump seats in the rear of the aircraft. His seat was next to Casey's. Even before the plane began taxiing from the gate, he started feeding his usual lines to the naive young wife. She was seated by the bulkhead. He leaned in close. Commenting on how cramped the space was, he placed his hand on her leg. Then he leaned over her, pointing at something through the small window. As he did, her uniform skirt began to ride higher and higher. When he noticed the lace top of her stockings, he realized she was wearing the gift he had given her, and that gave him a surge of confidence. Just before takeoff, he reached for her hand and leaned in closer. Casey was about to ask him to back off, but then he invited her to dinner at Le Jules Verne on top of the Eiffel Tower to celebrate her first visit to the City of Light. She said yes, with a smile, her hesitation melting into the moment. The connection between them felt electric, intimate in a way that caught them both off guard. Unfortunately, the aircraft was already airborne, and they had to return to their duties. 3 hours into the flight, complete darkness enveloped the sky outside. Most of the cabin lights had been turned off. Without warning, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The captain came on over the intercom. "Flight attendants, take your seats." The seatbelt sign lit up. That was when Steve invited her into one of the lavatories. She didn't hesitate. Beneath her uniform, she was dressed in elegant lace, carefully chosen, perhaps not just for comfort. Her uniform was neatly folded and placed on the baby-changing table. In the confined space, Steve pressed her gently against the wall. Their kiss was deep, heated, and full of unspoken tension. Casey responded with equal intensity, caught in the rush of adrenaline and emotion. What followed was fast, impulsive, and fueled by months of growing tension. It was a moment of reckless surrender, one she didn't plan, and one that carried consequences. By the time she remembered to speak, it was already too late. He adjusted his clothes in silence, while she quickly gathered her things. On his way out, he took a small piece of lace with him, a bold, silent trophy. After adjusting his uniform, he held the door open just long enough for his two accomplices to get a good look at Casey. Still adorned in lace, she blushed and quickly shut the door. As she slipped back into her uniform, she thought about what she had just done. She was slightly disappointed that she hadn't felt much pleasure and blamed it on the cramped space. "I can't wait to have Steve in a real bed," she thought. It never even crossed her mind to feel guilty. Matt saw through the app that her flight had taken off. Knowing her phone would be off, he called and left 2 messages. Catherine Clare. It was the first time he had used her full name since the day they got married. "Your anniversary gift is in your suitcase." The flight crew was deplaning when Casey turned her phone back on. She giggled. "I got a message from my husband." A chill ran down her spine as she heard him use her full name. But as she listened to the rest of the message, dread began to spread through her body. She dropped her suitcase and fell to her knees. A crowd began to gather around her. Her hands trembled as she opened the bag. When she unzipped it and saw the unopened box of protection, she screamed, "No!" and collapsed to the floor. Her lead flight attendant rushed over to see what had happened. Kaczmarski was 1 step ahead of him. He was already worried that he wouldn't get another chance to sleep with her that night. Casey saw him, and something inside her snapped. She started swinging her fists at him. It took 3 flight attendants and a couple of baggage handlers to pull her off. The lead flight attendant ordered Kaczmarski to report to the crew supervisor's office immediately. "If you did what I think you did on this flight," he said coldly, "not even your union rep is going to be able to save your job." When Casey tried calling her husband, it went straight to voicemail. She broke down, sobbing hysterically, begging to be allowed to fly back to Chicago, desperate to save her marriage. One of the flight attendants, the same older, silver-haired veteran who had tried to warn her, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I told you her husband would find out. They always find out." Casey let out a wail like a banshee screaming into the night. The lead flight attendant helped her into a chair. You're not the first naive young wife that bastard has seduced, but I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you're the last." Her hands were shaking as she replayed the second message. "By the time you hear this, I'll be gone. I always told you, there's nothing I hate more than a cheater. You lied and betrayed us. I'm leaving because I'm afraid of what I might do if I see you face to face. I hope I never see you again." She fainted. 4 hours later, Casey finally finished filing her sexual harassment complaint against Kaczmarski. A union representative promised to get her on the next flight back to the States. Unfortunately, that wouldn't happen for another 12 hours. Until then, all she could do was keep calling his phone. She sat on the floor of her hotel room, carefully, piecing together the torn fragments of her anniversary card. She wept uncontrollably as she reread what her husband had written inside. "Casey, you are my best friend, my love, and my wife. You complete me. I'm counting the minutes until you're back in my arms. Happy anniversary, my darling. 1 year together feels like forever." She spent a sleepless night curled up on the floor, cursing herself for being so foolish. The next day, she was able to catch a flight back to Washington, D.C. Her former airline had hourly service to and from Chicago, so she had no trouble catching the final leg of her journey home. She didn't say a word, but everyone seemed to know who she was, or at least what she had done, and treated her like an outcast. Many of the flight attendants looked down on a player only after they'd been caught, and blamed the game. Casey spent the entire flight trying to think of a way to explain what she had done. The moment she landed in Washington, she began calling Matt's cell phone. Still no answer. She fought to hold herself together as she left a carefully rehearsed message. "Matt, my love, I really messed up. I'm so sorry. Please. I know I don't deserve this, but please." Her voice broke, and she started sobbing. 45 minutes later, she was squeezed into a middle seat, flying straight into her fate. Casey left another dozen messages while riding in a taxi to their apartment. Her hand trembled as she inserted the key into the lock. She softly called her husband's name, her eyes scanning the living room. She feared he might have taken half of everything they owned, but everything looked exactly as she had left it. She walked through the dining room and kitchen. Everything was in place. The master bedroom looked untouched, but the closet door was closed. She braced herself and opened it. All that remained inside was a row of empty hangers. Staggering out of the closet, she collapsed onto the bed. A searing, white-hot dread tore through her stomach. Then it got worse. She looked toward her dresser and saw Matt's wedding ring resting on top of his cell phone. The room began to spin. She clutched the ring in her hand, cursing herself for destroying their marriage. It was nearly 1 a.m. before she could drag herself to the bathroom. She turned the shower on as hot as she could stand and tried to wash the shame away. But there wasn't enough soap in the world to scrub the stain from her soul. Casey knew she couldn't stay in the empty apartment. She needed her mother. So she ventured into the night, praying her mom would have the answer. Casey felt a little better when she saw the light of the dairy barn. She thought about the countless mornings she had spent there with her father, milking the herd, and wished more than anything that she could turn back time to the days before she made her mistake. The car tires crunched over the gravel. She had planned to walk the rest of the way to the house, but something felt off in the barn. "Uncle Hank," she called out. "What are you doing here?" Her mother's brother kept working as he replied. "Matt stopped by yesterday to explain to your parents why he was leaving. You know your mom's had a weak heart for a while now." Casey began to chant softly. "No. No. No. Please tell me she's alive." "She's alive, but not because of you," Hank said, flatly. "She had a massive stroke. Your dad called from the hospital and asked me to keep an eye on the farm. That's what family does." "Which hospital?" "If I were you, I wouldn't try to visit. You're the last person your father wants to see right now. Is Matt still here?" "No. He left last night after they stabilized your mom." I've never seen a man look more broken. Casey called crew support and resigned from the airline to work on the family farm. Her mother recovered but was left partially paralyzed. The adulteress became her full-time caregiver, a form of penance. More than 5 years passed. Casey was a devoted nurse, never complaining, even when changing her mother's adult diapers. When she wasn't tending to her mom, she helped with chores around the farm. She never acted like a martyr, not even on the day the sheriff handed her the divorce papers. She accepted her fate with quiet dignity. One crisp autumn afternoon, the angel of death visited the Morrison farm. Her mother passed away peacefully, with her husband and daughter by her side. The last thing she said to Casey was, "I love you. Now go on and live your life." The wake was held in the living room of the old farmhouse, just as it had been done 100 years ago. Everyone brought something to eat. Stories were shared, and old friendships rekindled. But this was a working farm, and the animals cared little for grief. Casey was tending to a sick calf when she saw a small boy walk into the barn. "Hi, cows," the 3-year-old announced to the large animals. Casey froze, staring at the visitor. She recognized his face from a black and white photo her former mother-in-law had once hung above the piano. No, that photo was nearly 30 years old. Her heart began to race. He had to be her ex-husband's son. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing. The little boy knelt in the hay beside her. "Are you okay, lady?" he asked. Casey trembled as she studied his face. Uncle Hank must have told him about Mom. The boy reached out his hand and said, "I'm Matt, but Mommy calls me Junior." In that moment, every dream, every hope Casey had still hidden in the corner of her heart, died. Thank you for being with us, and if you're one of those who watches silently, just leave a like. It helps new stories come to light.